You are listening to Jehovah's Watchmen, a consideration of doctrinal teachings, history, and current events in the light of Bible prophecy, and the special role of Jehovah's Witnesses in modern times, with emphasis on the importance of staying on the watch for the impending second coming of Jesus Christ. Now, your host, Robert King.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Jehovah's Watchmen. I guess it's a semi-annual edition because my last podcast, it's been quite a few months, back to the first of the year. And here it is, the waning days of August 2022. I was just thinking, come next month, it will be 20 years, 2 decades, since I first went online as e-Watchman and posted my first little essay. I hooked up with someone whom I'd met on the various JW discussion boards, and I offhandedly mentioned to him that I wanted to set up a website and had no idea how to go about it, because that was before really it was made easy. You had to know HTML, the hypertext markup language, and it was all beyond me. And so my friend and I collaborated. He did the back end and I did the front end. And 20 years later, we still are, except now we don't need to do the hypertext markup language. I take care of that. Blogging has been made easy, but he's still my web host. So, hey, a shout out to Timothy. And I've got a question here. That's usually the format of the podcast. I take questions from you, the readers and listeners. So I have a few questions here, sort of prime the pump. Do you believe there is a correlation to the Bible's stern warning regarding pharmakia? I don't know how that's pronounced. Pharmakia. I've heard it pronounced both ways. But anyway, is there a relation between pharmakia and the current worldwide push of a pharmaceutical with a verifiably short period of time, within a short period of time, worldwide, regardless of the forms of government across said nations, including those nations touting freedom and independence? Yeah, well, that word pharmakia is where, of course, our English word pharmacy, pharmaceuticals comes from. But in the Bible, pharmakia doesn't necessarily mean the use of drugs. It's always translated as, well, the New World Translation translates it as spiritism, and most translations say sorcery or witchcraft. So it's getting in touch with the spirit world. And as we know, there is an evil element to the spirit world. It's not the departed souls of dear old grandma, as some people might imagine. No, but it's wicked spirits, Satan and the demons. So we don't want to get in touch with those evil entities. But in order to get in touch with spirits, in the past, the witch doctors, medicine men, they would use various sorts of drugs. Natives of South America, North America, Africa, use all sorts of different kinds of plants, psychedelics perhaps, marijuana perhaps, to put them into a trance-like state in which the spirits would come in contact with them. So that's how druggery is related to spiritism, to witchcraft, to sorcery. But that does not mean that the use of all drugs, pharmaceuticals, is going to put us in touch with wicked spirits. That's not to say, obviously, this whole business with COVID and the so-called vaccines to counteract that disease, there's a lot to unwrap there, and I won't even attempt to do so. But I don't think it's pharmakia. I don't think it's witchcraft or sorcery, even though obviously there is a great evil behind it. The development of this disease, which on its own is not very deadly. And if people would have stayed out of the hospital, I'm sure the death rate would have been far lower, because the hospitals, as we know, were not allowed to use cheap and effective drugs. They were disallowed from using them and were forced to use remdesivir and intubation, and a lot of people did not survive that treatment. And so they died of COVID. Yeah. And as we know, the vaccine for COVID is not very effective. Lots and lots of people are getting sick with COVID that have been double vaxxed and boosted and what all. I mean, the President of the United States, the CEO of Pfizer, said he was COVID positive. Dr. Fauci, the science man, he had COVID too. So they lied. A lot of lies just piled up. There's an agenda behind it. What it is still playing out. I think it ties in with bailing out the bankrupt financial system, because as I pointed out many times before, that September 2019, they started this overnight repo, and it went on and on. The numbers got bigger and bigger. And then the pandemic, and it was trillions and trillions of dollars that were going everywhere. And boy, the money found its way into the stock market. It looked like things were going to crash, and then they were miraculously reversed. And so, yeah, we'll see where this thing goes. We know where it's going, but we're watching it as it goes. There's a second part to his question, though. He says, if there is a correlation to be discerned, what then of the association of demons with pharmakia in the scriptures and the Bible's warning of even king of the demons, Satan, coming into our midst as the system draws to a close? Well, I hate to break it to you, but Satan and the demons are already in our midst, and they have been for quite a while. You know, it's like microbes. You know, they're everywhere, and you have to develop an immunity to them. We have an immune system that helps us ward off literal microbes, and we have God's protection to help us ward off these evil spirits. But they do influence us. There is no way around it. Jehovah gives us his word, and if we follow it, we will receive much protection. Simply something as simple as being no part of the world. Something like bad associations. If we disregard Jehovah's word, then we open ourselves up to being influenced by an evil unnecessarily. And so Jehovah tries to protect us from it. In the future, Jehovah will allow Satan and the demons to just go full-on tyrannical. Let them get it up there. And that's what happened with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus said, "Why have you come against me as if a thief?" I taught in the temple all the time, and I was always, there for you. Why didn't you take me then? He said, "I'll tell you why. It's the hour of the authority of darkness." In other words, Jehovah was going to allow Satan to have his way with Jesus. And he did. And we're facing an hour of the authority of darkness. It's called the hour of test. that's coming upon the entire inhabited earth. The 1 hour that the last king will rule. And so all the protections that Jehovah has put in place, we might think of the government as an enemy, but it's up to this point, it has really been a protection for us. Unless, of course, you live in some Islamic country that outlaws Christianity. You could be arrested for having a Bible or whatever. But, here in Christendom, I live, of course, in the United States, and we're screened off, you might say. Jehovah has put the governments in place to provide freedoms for us. But that's all going to be taken away, isn't it? In the hour of test. So we don't know what's coming up. They might have another pandemic to roll out. Bill Gates seemed to think so, that this was just like a trial run to maybe condition us. And fear is the primary thing that the tyrants use. It might not be another pandemic. The fear of war, the fear of, food shortage. They're going to terrify us into trying to break us, to grovel before them. I'll do anything to stay alive, right? Isn't that why Jesus said, do not fear them? I'll tell you who to fear. Fear the one who can take away your life permanently, right? Fear Jehovah. So what if we die? It's not the end, is it? No. But if we compromise during that hour of test, it will be the end. So we have been forewarned, and we're very fortunate to have this advanced knowledge. I've got a question here, got it a few days ago. She says, I've read your book, and even though I don't understand everything, I've been an indoctrinated JW for 30 years. And she said, I realized something was wrong a number of years ago, but now it's all out there. And she said, I also listened to your talk about should Jehovah's Witnesses leave the organization. And the last sentence, you said, God really wants to find out what is in your heart, whether we really trust him. And so here's her question. Now that I know what's wrong within the Watchtower organization, the lies and deceit, something I absolutely hate and feel betrayed by, I wonder if Jehovah wants me to stay in the organization until the end, or do I demonstrate my faith in him now? Well, that's a good question. Could it be that you could demonstrate your faith to him by staying in the organization? Huh? Wouldn't that be an option as well? When she says, I wonder if Jehovah wants me to stay in the organization until the end, I would ask you to clarify what you mean by the end. The end of what? Because Jesus gave us very clear instructions that so we would know when it is time to leave. To leave what? To leave the place of worship. And that's what Jerusalem was, wasn't it? In the first century. The Christians did not, I hate to harp on this, but the Christians did not view the temple as some abhorrent thing. And the Watchtower says, well, the Jews had apostatized, they didn't accept Jesus, so the temple was, and the Jewish form of worship at that time was apostate. Well, it was and it wasn't. It was unfaithful. The majority of Jews were unfaithful because they didn't accept Christ. But God did not immediately reject them. And we know that because the apostles still kept some features of the law. They preached in the temple on a daily basis. In fact, Paul was out in the Gentile nations, and he very forcefully showed that the law was no longer in effect. And yet he came to Jerusalem, and the apostles instructed him, because the Jews were all saying that Paul was preaching an apostasy from Moses. And they said, to quell these rumors, we want you to go to the temple and offer a sacrifice. And Paul was humble enough to do it. He submitted himself to do that very thing. And what did he say? The principle, to the Jews I became as a Jew, although I'm not under law. He said, to those without law, I became as those without law. So he was following that principle. But he would not have done so if he thought the temple was, a pagan temple. Paul would not have gone into a temple of Zeus and made a sacrifice, would he? So Jerusalem and the temple serve as a symbol for the Christian congregation. Christianity began in Jerusalem. And like I say, the apostles were headquartered there and still viewed the temple as belonging to Jehovah. And so Jesus' warning was very relevant for them. When you see the disgusting thing standing in a holy place, he didn't say when you see it standing in an apostate place, an unholy place. They viewed the temple as something still holy. And so the Jews, when the Romans came, the Jews were outraged by that as well. But if they did not put faith in Jesus, if they did not pay attention to what he said, maybe some Christians thought, well, we'll see how this works out. Because the Romans came and it looked like the city was doomed, and then they mysteriously suddenly withdrew. Some of the Jews chased after them, claiming victory. God has brought us victory. But what happened? Well, 1 year passed, nothing happened. Another year passed, nothing happened. And another year. And the Christians who followed Jesus' instructions, he told them to let the man on the rooftop not come down to get his goods, and the man in the field not come back to his home. Flee to the hills and don't come back. But here it is now, 3 years. Maybe some did go back. Maybe some never left. And here it is, the Passover, the year 70, and 1 million people flooded into Jerusalem, proselytes and Jews from all over to celebrate the Passover. And that's when the Roman legions swiftly came, and they held a competition to see which battalion could put their segment of pointed fences around Jerusalem the fastest. And within a few hours, Jerusalem was surrounded and there was no way out. And the slaughter was horrific. But we know those words apply to us in the future because Jesus said it will come in upon the entire inhabited earth, a great tribulation upon the whole earth. But before that, Jesus said, when you see the disgusting thing standing where it ought not, then we're to take action. So we haven't seen that yet, because a prelude to that is war, nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom, food shortages, and pestilence. We're right on the edge of that, though, aren't we? Now, I didn't read the rest of this person's question. She says, I'm asking this because I don't really have anyone else to talk to. Which way should I go to meetings as required by Paul in Hebrews 10:25, and to go about preaching as required by Jesus so as to fulfill my service? How do I go about that? Well, since you brought it up, Hebrews 10:25, Paul was speaking to those Christians living in Jerusalem, by the way, right before the Romans came. And here Paul was telling them not to forsake your meeting together. But for what purpose? He goes on to say, encouraging one another, and all the more so as you see the day drawing near. Christians have this obligation to encourage one another. The questioner said she felt betrayed by the Watchtower. Well, that's understandable. It is outrageous, the hypocrisy. But who are they really betraying? Us or God? Well, I think you know the answer to that. They've turned their back on Jehovah. That's what apostasy is, a falling away from God. The brothers and sisters in the congregations, they're not aware of even what's happening, are they? And so I encourage those of you who know what's happening, who see this evil presence, who are aware of this developing apostasy, to stick it out for the sake of your brothers and sisters. Keep encouraging them. What Paul was saying in that same chapter to the Hebrews, to hold firmly to the public declaration and not throw away our freeness of speech. So if we leave, then we're viewed by the congregation, the brothers and sisters, they're going to view us suspiciously. They're going to think we're spiritually weak. They're going to think we've left the faith. They're going to think we're apostate, that we've turned our back on Jehovah. As it stands now, most of Jehovah's Witnesses are under the impression that the governing body speaks for God and everything they say comes from God. And we know that's not true. But it is interesting that we know the Pharisees were Jesus' worst enemies, that they were always out to trip Jesus up. They expelled people from the synagogue if they dared express any faith in Jesus. And yet, what did Jesus tell his apostles and disciples? He told them, whatever the Pharisees tell you, do it. Just don't do it with the same hypocrisy with which they do it. I realize it's difficult. The meetings have become, so watered down, mindless repetition. But again, if we consider the purpose of meeting to encourage one another, then you have an obligation then to someone else. Love of neighbor is a principle, right? Of course, if you're disfellowshipped, such as I, then that you can't really encourage someone else. And just going to meetings, sitting there, that's not encouraging either. So I know someone say, well, what about you? Well, okay, I've got another question here. This is an interesting one. He says, was the U.S. going off the gold standard significant as far as the downfall of the U.S. goes, or possibly significant if the U.S. or world government goes back on it? And then he asked, why does the God of the Bible seem to place such a high value on this otherwise worthless metal? You can't eat it or build houses with it. Maybe it's pretty to wear, but really, what else? Folks are said to be throwing it into the street someday, right? Okay. Well, it's interesting. The U.S. went off the gold standard exactly 50 years ago. I suppose that's why the questioners come up with this, because, a few blogs and videos have made mention of this, that in 1972, Nixon took the U.S. off the Bretton Woods system. The Bretton Woods system was set up after World War II, and it made the U.S. dollar the world's reserve currency. And the dollar was pegged to gold at $30-some an ounce. And so that made for a very stable economic system. And when the British sterling was collapsing, and in order to maintain their empire, which the colonial empire had been dissolved and they morphed into this financial empire. And in order to maintain control of that empire, they had to uncouple the US dollar from gold. And they, doing so, created this floating exchange rate. So there was no longer this stability. And it allowed for money to become the most traded commodity, you might say, even though it's nothing. Money by far is the most traded thing in the world, if you can get your mind around that. Obviously, for a global economy to work, there has to be some sort of foreign exchange. For example, if you buy a Sony or you buy a Volkswagen, and at some point your money has to be changed from a dollar into a yen or into a euro. But with the exchange rates fluctuating on a daily basis, actually minute by minute, there's no stability. And so buyers and sellers are forced to buy insurance, credit default swaps, and other derivatives to lock in their contracts and exchange rates and so forth. Meanwhile, the traders in the city of London are buying and selling money. That's all they do. Trillions of dollars worth per day. And, if you sell a few $1 million and exchange it into some other currency and you make a small percentage, then that adds up with the volume. So something like $3 trillion a day are traded, and only a small percentage of that is actually to facilitate trade of actual goods. So, well, it's like the Bible says, the love of money has become this root of all sorts of evil. Money controls everything. But the money has no value on its own. But that's not true of gold. And the questioner said, well, you can't eat it. Well, actually, you can. And it's not just like, eating some poisonous squid just for kicks. Do you know gold actually has medicinal value? It is being used in medicines. It can help with mood disorders. It can help with rheumatoid arthritis. And actually, gold is a very, very precious metal because it has very interesting qualities. Do you know your cell phone has gold in it? Most small electronics have gold. A small amount of gold because it is the best conductor of electricity, and it does not tarnish. That's why treasure hunters, if they find a sunken ship that was, stealing gold from South America 500 years ago, the gold still glitters. It doesn't tarnish, even if it sits in salt water for centuries. So yeah, it's used in all sorts of electronic applications, aerospace. Jehovah values gold in that he gave it to us to use as money, as jewelry. Solomon's temple was covered in gold. Everything was covered in gold because you can hammer gold out foil thin. 1 ounce of gold, you could cover a whole wall with it. If the goldsmith knows what he's doing, how to stretch it out without tearing it. You go back to the book of Genesis, the first mention of gold is in connection with the Garden of Eden. The rivers running out of Eden, I think through the land of Havilah, and they said that the gold of the land was good. Yeah, so Jehovah placed a value on it, and he knew humans would appreciate it. And it's interesting that gold and silver have always served as money. And in fact, paper money was derived from the use of gold because people back 400 or 500 years ago, I believe, if they began to accumulate gold, they had some security concerns. And certain people that were considered trustworthy opened up safety deposit box. They would store your gold for you. And so they would issue you a receipt, a gold certificate. And as time passed, if you had a gold certificate for, say, an ounce of gold, you could give that to someone else to pay a debt or to purchase something. And then they would own your gold on deposit. Well, eventually these certificates became money, and people would exchange these certificates. And it didn't take long for the goldsmiths, the bankers, to say, hey, we can issue these certificates, and we can issue more certificates than we have gold on deposit. Sound familiar? Yeah. So that's how this whole fiat business got started, because they would think everyone's not going to come and ask for their gold all at once, so we can keep some gold in reserve and just keep issuing these certificates, and we get it, a cut on these certificates. People are always trying to figure a way to game the system and cheat other people, aren't they? The Romans used to clip their coins. They would scrape a little of the silver or copper off their coins, shave it off a little bit, so you're getting less than the, official weight, whatever it was. But now it's ridiculous with the dollar taken off the gold standard. We've seen what has happened. Not only do they make money buying and selling currencies and manipulating the value of one currency against the other to make profits and destroy and indebt third world countries and on and on and on, but they've also been able to inflate this fiat currency. Just keep printing more and more and more. And it's always assumed that it's as good as the U.S. dollar, the backing of the U.S. Treasury. It's as good as gold. Well, no, it ain't. In fact, they've been manipulating the price of gold to keep this fiat currency indebted thing going just a little while longer. But guess what? This whole sanctions thing against Russia, you have to wonder if it was intended, because it is backfiring in such a massive way. Not only has Russia evaded all the sanctions that have tried to prevent it from selling its oil and gas, but it's set up its own gold exchange system now to rival the London Metal Exchange, which has been used to manipulate the price of gold. And the ruble, now Russia has required payment for its commodities in its own currency. So they're getting away from the dollar, and they're backing the ruble with oil, and it looks like they're going to back it with gold. So we're talking about the collapse of the dollar system and the euro and the yen and all of these currencies that are backed by nothing but debt. So yeah, at some point this thing has got to go. I'm talking about the whole financial system. It's like, it reminds me of that cartoon of the Roadrunner and the Wile E. Coyote, and he's always running off the cliff, right? And he runs out in thin air for a while, and he just keeps going until he stops and looks down, right? And then, yeah. So that's like the fiat money system. It's out over thin air now, and it's going running full speed. We know how it's going to end, though, don't we? Well, it's good to be speaking with you again. That's going to do it for this podcast. If you have questions, send them to the Watchman's Post at Gmail. And also, you can leave a voice message, and we'll do this again. And until then, may Jehovah bless your search for the truth.